What happens when life knocks you down hard? Accident, paralysis, the incredible learning how to walk, not once, but twice. Today's story is an incredible story of taking pain into a power and setback into a strength. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Lenka Schulze. I am so excited to introduce an extraordinary human being, Gina. Super excited to have you. And before we start, I will read your bio. So what makes Gina's story especially powerful is her incredible journey of resilience, learning to walk twice after life-challenging skiing accident, all while leading an award-winning school and building a global movement around conscious enlightenment leadership. Gina is globally recognized as a transformational leadership coach, #1 international bestselling author, and the host of the acclaimed radio show Gina Gardiner and Friends, which reaches over 3 million listeners worldwide. Her bestselling books, including Thriving, Not Surviving, The 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success and Fulfillment, and beyond her books, she created Enlightenment Leadership Program, which empowers individuals and organizations worldwide. Gina spent more than 3 decades helping individuals and organizations unlock their authentic power, lead with purpose, and create meaningful, lasting success. So thank you again for being here.
It's my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
You had been struck with the incident in your late 20s, and you felt like you finally created a sprouting, exciting life. And you got in a ski accident, experiencing the partial paralyzation of your body. So what did you learn from all that?
Oh, so much. I think when you're in the midst of all of that, it's hard to see the learning, the gift that comes. But when I look back, there was so much that came from it. And I think for me, the quality and the approach to leadership, the shift from having to be the person who directs everything to recognizing that when you are leading in a conscious way, it is about empowering other people to step in and to take radical responsibility for themselves, their thoughts, their beliefs, their actions, their words, their emotions. And I'd like to think I would have done it anyway. But it was because I couldn't physically get into the classrooms because I was wheelchair bound that I had to come up with a way where people would take radical responsibility for their own performance and a shared responsibility for the whole team. It was highly successful. We were an award-winning school on the best 100 schools in the country list twice during my tenure. And the gift has been that I've used that when I was in education with hundreds of teachers and dozens of schools. But since 2005, when I left the world of education, I've used it with individuals, with teams, with whole businesses. And the principles and the structures and strategies are as effective. Mm-hmm. And so what did I learn? Look what you can do rather than what you can't. Yeah. That it's not the challenge that defines you, but what you do with it. And how do you find the solution rather than dwelling on the problem, which takes you from victim to heroine or hero?
Yes, I love the fact that you had stayed in that job, even though it was so difficult. But I get stuck in that. How did she move through the doors? Like the literal, like how did the students and your staff took you seriously or with respect when you were not like right there every moment, you know? How did that work?
I think the first thing to say is that I was the deputy when I had the accident. The head died very suddenly in the summer holidays. And in those days, an incumbent deputy wasn't allowed to apply in the first round of applications. And I'd only been a deputy for a year. And it was a big school. And so they interviewed, they didn't appoint, and I was then given the opportunity to apply. So I wasn't in a wheelchair at that point, but I was still struggling with the aftermath of the ski accident. And life deteriorated in terms of my physicality, and I didn't start using a wheelchair, and that was in 1983. I was appointed in January 1984 to be the principal or head teacher of the school. And things deteriorated, and it wasn't until 1987 that I started to use a wheelchair. And to start with, I could use the wheelchair to get me from my office to the classroom or my office to the hall, and then walk in the classroom. It was later, when I found myself to be completely wheelchair bound, that I couldn't physically get in. Yeah. And I suppose by that time, I'd already started to develop an approach to leadership was around, I couldn't be behind people all the time. Mm-hmm. That I had to find a way of enabling those people to lead, become the leading professional, whether they were the teacher or the teacher's assistant or the cleaner or the secretary. And so I think a big part of that was collectively, we looked at what does excellence look like in the context of planning, relationships, discipline, whatever. And that collective language where we all had an understanding of what did it mean in real terms, I think that was a game changer. Because we so often talk about, we aim for excellence. But what does it look like? What does it feel like? Yeah. And when you start to break it down and you have a shared understanding of that expectation, then you can hold people to account against it. And the quality of whatever people are doing rises exponentially. Mm-hmm. And so there were lots of lessons like that, that people had to share the vision. It was no good that they only had the vision if I was with them. They had to be taking ownership of that vision, and their collective part of that, individually and within teams and as a whole. Mm-hmm. And these are principles that I believe that I learned because circumstances dictated it, but they've worked in every business that I've worked with, and the different businesses are wide-reaching because people are people. The widgets may be different, but how do you nurture and grow the potential of your people? That's common to whatever industry you're in. Yes. And the lessons that I learned in those early days are the same ones that I teach now.
Yeah, I kind of put myself in that story when you were talking, and I would see you as walking and talking the example, not just saying it, which means nobody could slack off when they saw you showing up with all the dis-ease in your body, just showing up. I think that spoke more than words, and your actions were speaking really loudly. And so that is excellent example of how leadership looks like. You don't have to be bound to a wheelchair to make a point. That's not the story. But the story is, like you were saying on one of your newsletters that I receive, is that every organization has a culture, but it's defined by its leaders. I cannot agree with that more so. And I feel that people can sense it now. If they go into dry cleaners or a restaurant or, big companies or schools, you can sense the leadership right when you enter. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think that, for me, one of the things around all of this was, it's very easy when you hear the story and we're talking to think that everything was easy. Yeah. It was a challenge, but the biggest challenge was me, not other people. I resisted using a wheelchair for a long time because what would other people think? Would they take me seriously? And my fear that people would think less of me because I was in a wheelchair meant that I struggled much longer than I needed to. Events overtook me and I had no choice. But ultimately, nobody batted an eyelid in terms of whether I was fit enough to do it. Some children would say, or pupils would say, why are you in a wheelchair? And I'd say, my legs don't work very well. And they'd go, okay. I think we are our biggest challenge. We limit ourselves, we make assumptions about how people will be, and that becomes our reality. We assume motive, we assume that our perspective is the only one. And what it's taught me time and time again is we're the common denominator. We take ourselves into every moment of every day. It's how we turn up in that moment that makes the difference. And we might want to blame everybody else, the environment, the politics, the this, the that, the other. But ultimately, how we turn up is up to us. And that determines how other people engage with us, how we succeed or not. And I think that that lesson is something that comes from taking radical responsibility.
Yeah, I love that. Do you feel that a lot of business owners are kind of complaining about the new generations, and they would want them to be the way they expect them to be, but they're not putting the finger on themselves first? From my experience is that I think we also shifting on a consciousness level, global and cosmic as well. And I feel that the new generations do not want to work for money. They don't want to make money. They want to create something that they would be rewarded maybe with money, if that would be the sense. Or, when I was hiring, I would be always looking for person who would share the same vision with me and work with me versus for me. And I found it really challenging because there's still this mentality, which I hope is dying off, that whole, I need safety and security and you will be it and you will provide that for me and I will then do some work for you. It's so disconnected on all levels for me. I don't feel it. And I also feel that as employers, it's so much pressure as well. It's not only that they working for you, you have to make sure that they doing their job. You would think they would, but if they don't share the same vision with you, they're not working with you, they're working for you. And I think that's the shift that I'm seeing in the new generations coming in. Would you agree with that?
I think that I do, but I think there's a lot in what you say. And I think in the first instance, I think that we are living in a time where it's a paradigm shift and these things are never instant. We used to think the earth was flat and it was illegal to think that the world was round. And then over time, that tipping point came where we recognized that the world was round. And I think leadership is in that bit before the tipping point. And I think many leaders are operating from a place of fear. Fear because of all of the externals that are going on, and they blame their staff. If only I had the right staff, if only the economy was better, if only. And I've written it's an intentional workbook journal, which is called Taking the Bullshit Out of Leadership, because ultimately you have to start with self. And you have to be the example you want from other people. I think that's first and foremost. And you have to be authentic about it. And recognize that unless you engage with people in a way that is inclusive, that you share your vision and you help them to have ownership of that vision, unless they share the values and understand the behaviors that go alongside those, unless there is a sense of trust built on integrity and respect, and I believe love, nothing pink and fluffy about love, that there are shared expectations where you can say to somebody, do you remember we had that conversation when you were interviewed about the fact we don't do moody and you're expected to be a good team member? Well, actually, that constitutes moody. So don't want to see that anymore. If people know that you're coming from a place of compassion and care, they will accept what in another situation would be seen as you having a go, as wanting them to be an even better version of themselves. But of course, if you're not doing what you're asking them to do and be, and it doesn't come across as being truly authentic, you've lost the game before you even started.
So what you're saying is that reminding them it's one thing, but also showing up like that as well. It's not, and also the other way around, not just showing up and allowing them to do something else. You have to call them on the action so they constantly come in and being aligned with that, I call it a vibration, but with that vibration you setting. Like if somebody is slipping away, you want to bring them back up.
And you want to bring them back up early. But it's important to set the expectation. The simplest example is when I employed new staff, I would say, before we start the interview, I just need you to know, expect you to work hard, to be a good team member. We don't do moody. And if that's going to be a problem, then let's part company now and save us all some time. If they were then appointed, and it was usually young staff who perhaps came on a Monday morning and they'd been on the lash at the weekend and came in with a bit of a hangover and they were being grumpy, I would just take them quietly to one side and say, that constitutes moody. The children in your team, or if it was actually in a business context, your colleagues don't deserve that from you. Mm-hmm. So please make sure you leave your grumpiness under your pillow with your pajamas or your nightie and come in and give of your best. And people will do that so long as the expectation is set that you model. It's no good you doing that and then you being grumpy and moody. You have to model that. Even if you're in a lot of pain or you're fed up and life isn't going well, you have to put that to one side. You can say to people, look, my temper's on a short fuse today because I've got a terrible headache, but you don't behave in a way that is out of alignment with the values that you've set up.
Yeah, because they would call it the rotten apple. And if you let it rotten too long, it's going to rotten the other apples as well. And so it's good to call it right away. And I mean, it also takes a courage because there's a lot of people who do not like to do the dirty job of calling them out. They have the managers to do it. And so again, it's just kind of like nobody wants to do that dirty job and still be popular. That's
it's not a dirty job if you have set up the expectations correctly, mm-hmm. and you engage with them and you confront the issue, but you're not confrontational. So to be able to say, Lenka, you've got so much potential. And one of the reasons you were appointed or one of the reasons you were promoted is because I have so much faith in you. What do you think about this particular situation? And you ask them, and if they say, well, I think it's all right, then I might say, do you know what? I got a different view. I think that you are so much better than that. And you can have the conversations, challenging conversations, but do it in a way that the other person can accept. And by being consistent, that's the other thing that sometimes, particularly leaders will, one day it's all hail fellow well met, and they're their greatest mate, and then the next day that nothing's right. And so whatever standards you set, they've got to be consistent, and you've got to be the person who demonstrates that mm-hmm. first and foremost. Mm-hmm. And that's in every area of your life. And before the show, we were talking about, levels of consciousness and using that inner wisdom. Mm-hmm. That's another, do we call it a skill or a gift or, I don't know, a practice, that the more you demonstrate yourself using that as a leader, the more you give permission and the more you enable other people to do the same. Mm-hmm. But that's not about just going willy-nilly. It's about matching your inner wisdom and your intuition with doing your due diligence and, taking care that you're not just, got your finger in the wind and, but you're doing it in a practiced way.
Yes. I believe the wisdom comes from knowing. That's not a knowledge, it's knowing. And the wisdom, the deep wisdom is rooted in love. And when we are somehow rewaking that in the presence of a leader, as an employee, that leader can hold it. But let's say that person has that inner wisdom and the leader doesn't. You could see that would be a very difficult position as well. And there's a lot of new children coming forward, which they could be already adults, and they would call themselves empaths. And they can call the phony leaders from far away. That's that intuition comes in. But they don't necessarily know it, that they know it. They just know that something's off. Yes. And that's when I like when you're saying that culture is just then muddy, because that leader presenting these high voltage ideas, but it doesn't really necessarily embody them deeper. The empath comes and start picking up on it, right? I mean, have you come across as an empath potentially yourself with these kind of individuals that they have the pony show? And you can feel
all around us, aren't they? You've only got to look at the news or social media or And if you, I belonged, my first two jobs as a teacher were to work with leaders exactly as you describe. And it was challenging. I think we always talk about leadership and about leading down, you lead your team. But I think there's a lot of mileage around how do you learn to lead up and lead across. And again, some of it is about leading by example. And some of it is about being brave in appropriate ways to go and say, actually, I don't think this is acceptable. And I can remember I was a very young teacher, and there was a situation with a child who'd been abused by the mother. And I went to the head teacher and I said to him, this is a child abuse situation. It needs to be reported. And he said, oh, he'll be all right. And I actually said to him, either you report it or I will do it, because this child has been burnt with an iron by his mother because she was cross. And I think there are times when you have to stand up and say, I'm not going to put up with this. Yeah. It got worse because when I phoned social services, they're the people who deal with such things, I was then told, well, he's moving to Clacton in 3 weeks. We're going to leave it to the Clacton team. Wow. And I said, either deal with this or I will take it further. You cannot leave a child who's got a big blister on his arm where his mother has hit him with a hot iron and leave it for 3 weeks. This needs to be investigated and sorted. So, I mean, some might turn around and say I was being a bit of a stroppy mayor. But I think if it does not fit with your values, you have three choices. You either confront the issue, not be confrontational, and I do it with a neutral voice, with a real set intention that this needs to be dealt with. No shouting, no histrionics. You can ignore it and live with yourself having ignored it. Or you can take the line that I'm going to do something about it and I'm going to protect that situation that's different to dealing with the leader. And I think all of us have choices moment by moment about what's right for us. But I think what's happening with many of the younger generation is that they're being much more picky about which organizations they're going to work with, that they take time to find out what the culture is. And if it's not the right culture, they're much quicker to vote with their feet and say, I'm not working here, and take themselves off to somewhere else.
Yes. Thank you. These examples are really powerful because children do not have voice. If that happens to an adult, then we still would feel obligated to report it, but it's different situation, but the children have no voice. It is our moral duty. Doesn't matter who sees it or who feels that it's happening. It's a moral duty to every single one of us to do that. So I'm so glad you bring in that up. And I feel like the new generations, they come in with, like you were saying, if they don't like it, they leave much sooner. They're not going into 25-year waiting for the retirement. If it doesn't align with them, they leave. And again, the leadership doesn't necessarily like that because they are very free. But at the same time, if they don't get recognized for their the worth that they bring in, if they don't like that culture, or they just will not sell their soul, they will go somewhere else. And I love the fact that they trust themselves that they will be some other opportunity versus the older generations. They were kind of stuck into, I have to do this because I am almost retired and then I have to get all the benefits and all the money that I put in. And they don't even realize how much soul they were selling throughout the years because they were putting up with the culture that was nothing more than toxic.
I do think there's a distinction that is important for us to make. And I think there are those that know their value and give value. And there are those who feel entitled without giving value.
Yes.
And I think it's important to make the distinction. And I don't have much patience for people who think it is their right to not contribute, but to take.
Yes.
And doing so, they devalue themselves and they put the burden on other people. But I think knowing your worth, doing that deep dive work on yourself, and recognizing, all of your strengths and your areas for development is incredibly important. And that is often something we avoid because it's difficult. It's not easy to make that really loving relationship with yourself, but it's the most important relationship you'll ever have, because every relationship that we have is a reflection of the relationship we have with ourselves.
Yeah, so true. So if I change the subject, what holds people back from their authentic power? They want to feel empowered, and then you've given them all the tools in your training. What holds people back from gaining that authentic power?
I think more often than not, it's fear. Fear of leaving their comfort or familiarity zone. Fear of, what will people think of me if I don't engage in people pleasing? Because that's what I've done all my life. And I think, our conditioning has a great deal to bear in that. When you're being your authentic self, whose permission are you requesting? Is it your parents or your teachers or your partners? Are you brave enough to really think about and to engage in what's right for you, even though it may mean that you are no longer operating in the way that you've always done, and there's the potential that people will move away, not spend time with you. But I think for me, being aligned with yourself is about stepping into the unknown, or rather stepping into a place where you can remember who you are. And for many people, that remembrance is something that feels unknown. It's not, but it feels like you're stepping off the cliff, when the reality is that there's a step 2 inches down, but you can't see it.
Yeah. And you definitely walk in the walk. So that was exactly what you have been faced with. Here's this fear, how I'm going to function for the next 50, 70 years of my life. So you didn't have a choice but to make somehow that happen. Where did you start? Do you think you were starting after your realization that you have to shift in order for you to walk again? Was it based in that trust in the spiritual realm, trust in yourself? Was it trust in that physical understanding that the body with these exercises will do this? So I would love to hear that answer.
It's a great question. And I think it was all of those, but at different times. So my mum used to call me bloody minded. If I was told no, it was usually a really good opportunity to say, well, I'll show you. And I think when doctors said to me, I don't know if you'll ever walk again, it was, well, what do you know? I'm going to show that I can. But interestingly, the walking bit and the capacity to engage with my professional life, the decision I made very, very early on was, if I'm going to be the head of this school, my disability cannot be seen as a barrier to the school succeeding. And in many ways, that acted as the pilot light. That was my measure. And at times that was at my own detriment. It wasn't until years later I recognized that health was not, I didn't see health as one of my values. And so I was a workaholic. It was great pain control. But ultimately, I think when I started to reawaken and realize that I'm a spiritual being in a human body, that actually came later. And I would say that I'd left headship. I was very interested in the spiritual stuff, but I never had time. And it wasn't until I started doing more studying and actually doing the deep inner work with myself that I actually started to realize that when we are each being authentically who we are magnificent. Even though we've got wobbly bits and things that we need to work on, that we are creative, amazing human beings who have no concept of our capacity and our power. Because as we unfold, we only have revealed the next step and the next step and the next step. And so it's about, how do we open the door of possibility? Because when we do that, the opportunities are endless if we don't get in our own way. But we're very good at self-sabotage. I mean, human the human race as are just incredibly practiced at self-sabotage in all its forms. And so this is about a constant reminder. Am I self-limiting? Is this something that I'm putting the barrier in the way? Or have I preconceived it has to be this shape, when the reality is when I surrender and let it go, it opens up into something which is far more powerful.
Mm. Yeah, as you were speaking, I saw my own journey, and I would say my 30s, I have been healing with the physical consciousness, like, the body, the vitamins, da. The 40s was the emotional and mental healing that I had to open up and heal. And now it's the spiritual. So because I see that the tools from the physical and the mental emotional doesn't work at this level. You have to take the big guns that is beyond this realm to heal what's coming through now. And I'm listening to you. I feel like that was the same way. First, you muscle yourself through it. Then you were thinking, okay, this doesn't work. So you did the mental emotional. And then you realize, oh, there's a lot of juice in that spiritual stuff. And that is potentially propelling me even further than the other things, at least assisting you greatly.
Our conditioning is generally, well, certainly my conditioning was, you work really hard for success, that you have to power through. And I can remember, talking about it like, it feels like a bus trying to drive a bus that's got no engine uphill. What I recognize is that when we get out of our own way, when we truly engage with that sense of authentic connection with our inner wisdom and consciousness, things happen. Seeming miracles can happen with ease and grace. But we are perverse as human beings. We're wrongly named. We should be called human doings, because it's in the beingness that we often struggle. But I would say to you that I think, and I agree with you, our 20s is who are we as a human being? Our 30s are how do I repair who I am as a human being, and, physically, and then the mental and so on. But I think for all of us, it's that recognition that work that we do on our human body, on our mental and emotional body, are all foundations for the future us. And that if we don't do that work, then the future stuff is much more difficult.
Yes, it's building the foundation, the brick by brick.
Yeah.
I have another question that's always was on my mind. So you work with leaders all over the world. From your perspective, how can someone be both compassionate and commercially successful without selling their soul?
I think you can't be successful in my terms of success, which are holistic, unless you are compassionate. And I think that kindness in business, people think of it as an add-on. When you are kind in business, when you are compassionate to your staff, yourself first, your staff, compassionate, not indulgent, I think there's a huge distinction. When you are compassionate about the people that you work with, or the people who you provide products for, you develop a relationship built on trust, respect, in the long term. So your success may take a little longer to get there, but you're going to be successful in the long term. And I proved it time and time again in terms of the businesses I've worked with, that when leaders come from a place of integrity, compassion, and the courage to do what's right rather than self-serving, those businesses succeed and their profitability goes through the roof. But because they've seen their people as treasure and they have nurtured them and their potential, and as a result, everybody is engaged in delivering whatever the vision is. And so for me, it's not an add-on. It's an absolute central tenet of conscious leadership.
Beautifully said. I see exactly what you're talking about. It's like if you hold the consciousness of your worth, there's no other way but you see the worth of the people in front of you as well. You see the blueprint of their potential and you just want to bring it forward the best way as holding the platform. So shifting a little bit and tell us about your radio show.
So I have a radio show which is called Gina Gardiner and Friends. You can listen to it worldwide on a free Apple or Android app called Brushwood Media Network. The show, there's 5 shows a week, and the show goes out at 3 a.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern. So it goes across the world. It's then immediately goes onto their archive and to all of the podcast platforms. My guests, it's an organic conversation, but the one rule is it has to add value to the listener. So the themes are as wide-ranging as you can imagine. However, that's the premise for all of them. And so we have an organic conversation about the theme my guests choose. We look at how do you find a better way as a human being in terms of your life, your business, whether it's looking at spirituality, your health, your money. As I say, the themes are really eclectic. And I have the great joy and the great privilege of talking to amazing people. Sometimes it's an inspirational story. Sometimes it's an author who's passionate about a particular theme. But ultimately, my listeners leave the program feeling better resourced and more positive than when they started.
Yes, it's a multidimensional show. I love that. Just like you, there's no stopping of you. It's just, that's unbelievable. So inspirational. So we're coming to the end of our show, and I was wondering, what message would you like to leave with our listeners regarding the first sense, the intuition, and now how to live in alignment with it?
I think our intuition, our inner wisdom tends to come when we're quiet and we live such busy lives. You know, if you think about your work and the family and social media and many people will talk about meditation or, or doing something creative and getting into that flow. I don't think it matters how you do it. And it's going to be different for every person. For me, it's getting out in the garden, getting out into nature, perhaps listening to music. I'm not great at meditating. I find it very difficult to have that daily practice. But for some people, that works really well. But it's finding what works for you. And in that quietness, being prepared to pose a question. So what is success for me? But often we only ask the question once. And I think when we ask that question a number of times, what does success look like in my personal life? What does success look like in my relationships, in my business? But then what does success really look like? Okay, what does it really, really look like? And a really helpful way is to journal, where you're just free writing, no filters, and allow yourself to just explore. But find that quiet time. And often when we're very stressed, we think what we've got to do is to forge ahead and push. Take 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. Sit down, take some deep breaths to get you into right brain thinking rather than left brain thinking. And a great exercise is to just sit and then go through each one of your senses using sight as the last one. What can I feel? What can I feel externally? I can feel the seat on the back of my thighs. What am I feeling internally? What can I smell? What can I taste? What can I hear externally, internally? And then open your eyes. Well, what can I see? And recognize that your perspective becomes your reality. So is what I can see the only perspective? Or can I shift that perspective and give myself a different reality? And it takes 2 or 3 minutes. But that exercise can just settle you into a place where you can actually make connection with that inner wisdom, with that consciousness, which is very difficult to do in a busy world.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I like the end of it, you saying the perception creates your reality. Mm-hmm. And just shifting the perception of what you think you see, it will shift how you see things and experience it. And thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your heart, and your story. And you are one of the powerful reminders that you can take hardship and create a strength and leadership with your just pure existence. Thank you, listeners, for watching our episode. Hopefully you got inspired by Gina's story to reawaken your first sense. And please subscribe, share, and I'm looking forward to our next time. Thank you. This is Dr. Lenka Schulze, and thank you so much for our guest, Gina.